Okay, so I'm going to try and, in the limited time that I have, take you through my journey as a designer, which is something that I can speak about for 5 days running, I think, but I'll try and do it in 20 minutes. Um, so I think once you guys are, I mean, if you choose to do a career in study design, at some point in your lives, people will ask you, what made you take up design? Right? I get asked that a lot. I'm sure all of us do. And when I was asked this at my NID interview, that what makes you want to be a designer, the first thing that came to mind was water. And this is one of those moments in life that you're absolutely not prepared for, but the absolute clarity that you get, takes you by surprise sometimes. And my answer was something about eddy currents. So all my life I've been looking at water, and I'd never realized it until that moment when I was asked this question. And I'd been looking at water in its different shapes and forms, and not just in its stillness, but also in its motion. And I've kind of intuitively been studying eddy currents and how water mixes into containers, and the shapes it takes, the patterns it makes, how it interacts with light. And these were not conscious observations. These were more things that were just unconsciously being done. It was just something that I couldn't switch off. I was just constantly in love with things that were happening around me. I was always observing, and I think that was my answer. So for better or for worse, it got me in. And now looking back, I realize it was nothing but a love for life. A love for learning. So if you want to be a designer, you have to have that innate love to, and desire to understand the world around you and how it works in its myriad manifestations, right? So I think that is the essence of design and designers, right? What makes the world go around? What are the hidden connections between things? And if you feel this in your bones, then definitely design might be on the cards for some of you at least. Now, I really detest thinking of myself or calling myself a product designer, even though I was trained as a product designer. But to make it easy to relate, I'm going to take you through the kinds of projects that I've been working on, and also some of the decisions that I've taken along the way to try and explain better what it means to be a designer, in terms of a constant engagement with your work. So I started off designing aeronautical equipment in Bangalore, and this was almost for about 8 months. And then I did automobile design. Any good product designer worth their salt at some point fantasizes about designing cars. And I was no different. I did that for about 3 months, and I did fabulous work with a company in Bangalore. But at the end of 3 months, I realized even though the work was driven by exploration and it was just a lot of concept design, I realized that it was a lot of leaning towards aesthetic driven work. While it's great for some people who like to do that, that wasn't for me. I needed to do more, right? So beyond just the singular one-dimensional approach to design. And what I did then was I joined a company called Human Factors International, which is a usability, in those days they used to call themselves a usability engineering company, which is UX design these days, for the HP Labs gig. Now, HP Labs in Bangalore at that time was, their charter was to design web and software-based solutions for emerging economies. And that sounded like heaven to me. So what I did was, for the next 2 years, I did everything from brainstorming points of intervention. So that is, figuring out where we want to, what kind of spaces do we want to get into. So whether that was distance education, telemedicine, inventory management for mom and pop stores, anything. So first coming up with the problem space, then talking to the people in that space, creating a business plan, sending it to HP Labs Palo Alto, getting approval, funding, coming back, making teams here, doing the design, building the product, doing the testing, refining it, and then finally handing it over. Any designer's dream come true. But at the end of 2 years, I got sick and tired of it, because I realized that this approach to design was disingenuous. And what I mean is, it's like saying that, okay, we do one thing, right? So we do UX design, or we create software systems. So now we are going to come and solve your problems as long as the solution is a software system. You see the problem with that? Right? So I kind of, again, I hadn't articulated this to myself. I wasn't explicitly aware of it, but I knew there was something wrong with this approach. So towards the end of 2005, I left HP Labs and HFI, and I moved to Delhi and I set up my own design practice, Kiba Design, as a space to really explore what design is in the first place. You know, what it means to me, but also what it could be. Not just to me, but to people that I work with and to society at large. So I decided to do a lot of things, you know, rather than think of myself as a product designer or a UX designer. I said, let's just see what I can do, right? So I started off doing all sorts of things. I did, my very first engagement was in exhibition design, actually, which, as some of you may be aware, is actually a discipline that requires a lot of different skills to work together, right? So you need to have some understanding of graphic design, visual design, some understanding of structural design, of furniture design, the design of spaces. You have to know how people flow through a space. You have to understand how design can relate to culture and how you can build narratives. So how can you build a story around a particular exhibition that you're creating that people would want to engage with? How do you get people to care about your work? So it was a very interesting place to work at after doing 2 years of HP Labs, you know, UX design. I did a lot of work with various kinds of craftspeople. Again, the end products were not really what were important. Like, these are some examples of them. But it's more about the approach, right? So these were projects that, so the projects were not about craft. The project was, so this particular project was an exhibition on federalism, you know, so federalism in India. And then what happens is you find ways to interpret what the concept of federalism, pardon me, means, right, to the people. And how do you create structures of engagement that people care about? So every opportunity I get, I try to, you know, bat for the small guy. So, and unfortunately, crafts in India has become that small guy. So as designers, how can we engage with craftspeople to bring their work into the forefront? So this and some other things which I'm not going to show now were the result of that exploration. So we created, you know, an installation of the Tree of Life, which was flanked. And if you look at depictions of the Tree of Life, it is usually flanked by flora and fauna. So we created over 100 lamps that depicted flora and fauna, and we suspended them from trees that were next to the installation. Sorry, I'm getting into a little bit of detail, but what you're going to hopefully I'm going to hopefully try and explain how this relates to people. Now, what happened is, when you do something like this, the nature of the installation becomes interactive, because people suddenly see something that they relate to, right? It's not a piece of art that you cannot touch. You know, it becomes something that is from the everyday. It is something so accessible. It's a piece of craft which you apply a modern, say, structural technique to. You bring a modern interpretation to it. At the same time, it's depicting a traditional piece of knowledge, you know, the Tree of Life. So how do you connect with people on multiple levels? I have also engaged with the luxury sector, and didn't really work for me again. I found it was a lot of surface level engagement. However, in the decades since, a lot of things have changed. You know, brands across the world are debranding, and they're realizing that people desire authentic contact. So brands need to speak an authentic language. So it's very interesting to see that some of the choices I made 10, maybe more years ago are probably not not as clear cut today, because of the nature of the landscape and how it's changing. I've done over the years, as a trained product designer, of course, I've done a lot of work in hardcore, what we call hardcore industrial design. So it's the design of objects, industrial objects, and that in itself is, something that can take up your all of your time and mind space, should you let it. But that wasn't nearly enough for me. So I had to dabble in all sorts of unfamiliar terrain, and I've had a ball of a time doing that. Now, one of the greatest things about a design education is, if it's done right, then it gives you the tools to really explore laterally related fields. Okay, and in some cases, completely unrelated fields. Because what it does more than anything is it teaches you a certain way to see things around you. You know, one of the first things that they do at NID, or they used to at least, was for the first week or 2 weeks, all you do is you draw lines. You do nothing else but draw lines. What that does is it strips away all preconceptions that you've had till that point. Okay, there's an entire process of unlearning. It forces you to unlearn what you thought you knew about the skill of drawing, right? You learn what a thick and thin line means. You know, you become so sensitized that from the time that you start drawing a line to the time that you end, you begin to notice how much thicker the line has gotten because your pencil has worn down. Okay? And I'm only giving you some very, very basic examples. The same philosophy is applied in design pedagogy time and time again, where all your preconceptions, all your societal programming is stripped away and a new way of thinking and looking at the world is taught to you. So you're able to now look at the structures of the world around you. You know, you're able to stand here, and I know exactly how to depict this space in terms of 3-point perspective or 1 point or whatever I choose to do, right? But more importantly, I'm able to relate to the people in this room because I'm able to pick up certain kinds of cues. I've been trained in design research, which requires an understanding of human beings. How do you learn the social structure? Learn to study the social structures around you. Right? How do you learn to appreciate the variety of culture? And being in a country like India, it's something that is part of us as we grow up, right? But here you're given a very active construct to understand that and then apply that in your work. Now this happens over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, depending on where you're studying and what you're studying. And at the end of that process, you apply the sum of that knowledge in a single design project. Right? So it's a systems design project is what we used to have at NID. So the ability to bring all of that learning to your work is something that is these days referred casually to as design thinking. Right? And that is a big problem for me. Design thinking, while it's a great tool and everything, is taught to us. It's nothing but thinking like a designer, right? Now, it's taught to us over the course of 4 years, and I've just illustrated to you the variety of skills, the extent of unlearning and relearning that you have to do to become a design thinker. And then it takes years of practice to become any good at it. But if you go to Harvard or you go to MIT, there's a 2-day course and a 3-day course, respectively, in design thinking. So I would urge everybody to just be a little careful of what's happening in the world around you, be a little bit more informed. I've worked in all sorts of projects. From very low tech, no tech, to high tech, cutting edge, bleeding edge, you name it. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, what you're doing is you're solving problems for human beings. Okay, the vehicle for creating the solution will always change. Your job as a designer is to be able to pull in, to connect the dots, and then to pull in the resources and act as that sort of a facilitating engine for the creation of that solution. So don't think in terms of design deliverables. Don't say that, okay, I'm going to be a product designer who will design ABC product. I'm going to design the next iPhone or this. It's not about that. You're not a graphic designer who's going to design packaging, or you're not an exhibition designer who's going to design a museum. You are a person who is trained in solving problems and in connecting the dots. And design is the only discipline, and I can say this with absolute certainty, that actually connects and straddles all the other disciplines that exist today, right? We are the only function in any organization that talks to all the other functions, right? So we will talk to, from the lowest levels of implementation, we will talk all the way up to strategy and CEO level. Design is the only one that does that. So as designers, we must be aware of potential designers. You must be aware of the immense power, the transformative power of design as an agent of change. I've obviously worked on many digital platforms. Um, the example here is a project called Saha PDF, where I was tasked with creating sort of an online encyclopedia for Indian culture and heritage. And this was done way back in 2011. And some of the solutions that I created for this didn't exist even on Google Apps at the time. And we came up with some very interesting approaches on how the platform might be more than just a sort of a dead collection of knowledge. It would be a living thing that people would contribute to and learn from. So it ended up being so much more. It ended up being a research platform. Why I'm telling you this is because one of the things you learn to do, or one of the things that designers do, is we see the big picture, right? So oftentimes clients come to us with a very limited understanding of the problem space. Okay, they'll say, okay, I need a new product. And then if you just scratch the surface and you ask them, why do you need a new product? And I say, it's time, it's been around for 5 years, 10 years, let's come up with a fresh new coat of paint, something new. But if you start, now as designers, we are critical thinkers, right? So we have to analyze the problem space. So what I've found myself doing is I've moved from working on design deliverables to working on design strategy, which means that as designers, we then begin to engage with organizations to help them understand what it is that they're doing in the first place. So if you're thinking of a career in design, and if you're thinking that you're going to hit the industry and you're going to be making brochures and logos, or you're going to be making iPhones and Tesla cars, then you can forget about it, because that is just a very, very small part of what you will be called upon to do, or of what you have the ability to do. The ability of a designer is unparalleled in terms of of an educational training. And that's largely because design doesn't exist in silos. Some of you may not have heard the term silos if you're school students or recently graduated, but it is something where your thinking is relegated to only what you've been taught, right? So as an engineer, you're only taught engineering, or as a management trainee or graduate, you've only been taught the principles of management. That is not how I believe this course at JKLU is being formulated, which is fantastic. It's essentially walking the talk, and the talk is what is happening these days in design. So it is an incredible opportunity for this organization to do something that breaks the silos and creates this conversation between design and other disciplines. I've of course dabbled in branding, and please be brutal with your feedback a little bit later. This is something that we used to call PD graphics, product design graphics. But the idea being that with your design education, you're given the tools to really look at the world with very curious eyes, and you can do very interesting things. I'd like to talk very quickly about the logo on the far right. It spells Amba, if you really force your mind to believe that. But that was done. Now again, I don't think any graphic designer worth his or her salt would ever design that. Okay? But luckily, I did not have the shackles of a graphic design education to hold me back from doing it. And I'll tell you why I designed that logo. So this was for an organization called Amba in Bangalore that works with people, young adults, that are mentally challenged. I don't even know the politically correct word for this. I'm sorry about that. But so people who have IQ levels lower than 70, right? They are unable to function in society. And what this organization does is that it takes them and it trains them and it gives them gainful employment, which is something which is absolutely unheard of, people at that level of IQ. And even their motor skills and their ability to function in society is so impaired. And what this organization is doing is it's working with them day in and day out and helping them to function as, to survive, not to survive, but to thrive as functioning, contributing members of society. And I've been there. To work with people like this who might not recognize you, a minute down the line during a conversation, and they might start, hitting you because they don't know who you are, and until they snap back to reality, or what we know as reality. it takes a lot of heart. And what they do is they work extensively with volunteers. So they needed an identity that connected with people. They work with school children a lot, you know. And most importantly, they needed an identity that the people at Amba themselves, these people with their brain development problems, could relate to. So I came up with something that was instantly recognizable, and it was something that could be recreated by the people, and they could own the logo. So what's happened is over the years they have absolutely butchered the logo. You know, they will create the logo in different places using flowers and with all sorts of material. The tracking will be off, and kerning will be off, and they'll replace Amba, which is a slab serif, with Times New Roman and things like that, which to a purist would be I don't know, heresy, right? But it really works. To me, as a designer, I think the brief was met because we made a human connection, and people now care for the design output. Now, this is what a design education does, right? It helps you to connect with people. And I've got to say, there's nothing else that prepares you for that, because almost every other pursuit of knowledge basically prepares you to go out there and make more money for people who are already rich. It's just how it is. I have tried to channel some of my energy and some of my time in projects that have a social relevance. Two of these, I don't know how I'm doing on time, Bala, but can I talk about them quickly? Okay. So that's Amba I've already spoken about. I'll talk about this one very, very quickly. This was a hackathon that I did back in 2013 at New York. This was in collaboration with Mozilla and Tribeca Film Institute. And the brief here was to create new channels for storytelling online, right? So how do you come up with new paradigms for web native storytelling? And my group included a filmmaker who had shot a short documentary of a lady taxi driver in Delhi. And so what I did was, the way I approached it was to chop up this documentary into smaller bits and lay them out in, along an actual map, a route map, and then track her life story through this documentary. Now, what this does is that once you follow the route map, you begin to empathize with this lady, and you understand a little bit of the challenges of being a woman taxi driver in a city like Delhi. And if any of you are familiar with that, it'll turn even the most kind-hearted ones of you into murdering, aggressive sorts. It's just terrible. But now, why was this important? If any of you have been have been keeping in touch with Twitter, in recent years, Twitter has been trying to sell itself, and it came very close, with Disney almost buying it. And Twitter, the deal finally fell through because Twitter has a huge problem with bullying. Online bullying on Twitter is off the charts. And what this did, at the end of this process, what we did was we added the Twitter hashtag women drivers. So there was a field where you could add your tweet after that. Now, if you look at the hashtag women drivers, it's all negative, right? There are videos and photos of traffic accidents, and then someone will pass a smart aleck comment, and they'll hashtag it women drivers, right? Even if it was a man driving. So there's a very negative connotation to that hashtag, as with a lot of Twitter, and that's actually a very real problem. The company couldn't sell itself. Now, what this framework did was it allowed people to empathize with the lady who was a woman driver, and then at the end of that journey, they were able to add a comment, which was hopefully by this time a positive comment, right? So the framework, we called it Reclaiming the Hashtag, and it's available freely on GitHub. The framework actually allows for positive social change. And this again is nothing but problem solving as designers. This was not part of my brief. I was not required to do this, but I saw the opportunity and I made the connection. And that's how this came about. That's actually the great joy of being a designer. You can do these things which no one's paying you for, it costs no money, but once in a while it makes the world a slightly better place to live. So in 2012, I had the opportunity to work with the government. Some of you know about this. But what was happening was, government was looking for ways to engage with designers in the creation of a design ecosystem, innovation ecosystem in the country. What we were trying to do was understand how design education could play a role in that. So I'm not going to go into details of the project itself, but rather talk about the fact that as designers, you also have the ability to engage at that level, at the very highest levels of strategic thought. So in fact, my proposal was accepted into the 12th five-year plan, and since 2013, MHRD has been busy implementing it. So it's essentially the new, policy on design education for the country. And what's happened is that this was one of the few successful design engagements within government. That is not how it should be. It should be a matter of course. Government should be engaging with design and designers at all levels, all the time. That is something that hopefully will change. Hopefully some of you will be part of that story if you become designers. But just again, to illustrate that design and a design education allows you to think at the very highest levels, creating policies that affect the lives of millions. This is hardly important, but along the way you also rack up a few awards, which is nothing but a bunch of people saying, okay, you've done something worthwhile in your life. But again, what I wanted to do was illustrate a very, very simple, to give you a very, very simple example of how you can approach a design problem. So this on the left is a geyser that I designed for Havells 2-3 years ago, and it's called the Adonia. So how do you go about designing a geyser? Right, a geyser is like the most boring thing ever. No one looks at a geyser, and that's a problem, that you don't look at a geyser. I mean, you don't really want people to come and marvel at your geyser, but it can be something that is not ugly in your home, right? So what I did was, just to give you an example of how you might go about approaching a problem like that, I looked at what the fundamental problems were with the geyser. And the fundamental problem really is that most geysers have a green light and a red light on it, right? Now, green and red as colors are absolutely loaded, right? So green is, it says it's safe, or it's the sign for go, whereas red is danger, it's hot, it's stop. So I don't know what's going on. Is it safe for me to use the water, or should I just wait till it becomes hot, or is it time to stop and just back off? So what I did was I came up with this idea of just having a simple color transition from cool blue to deep red. Right? So very intuitively convey the idea that the water is cold and now it's hot. And interestingly, this had never been done in the world. Okay, so the company's actually gone ahead and patented the idea, and they're making tons of money, they're not sharing it with me. It's just how it is, the reality of being a designer in India. No one wants to take you along for the ride. But it was fun, right? It's an opportunity again to go beyond the Call of Duty and do things. On the right is, this started off as an idle sketch. In 2013, I was doing nothing. I was just like sitting and sketching, listening to some music. I wasn't really trying to do anything. And I just did this kind of a loop, and I said, hey, that looks interesting. And I forced it through sheer force of will into a rocking chair. And then I said, okay, I have some free time. So I made a 3D model of it, and I sat on it for the next 3 years. I did nothing with it. And the idea was a rocking chair that you could use, like you could straddle it like a saddle, you could sit on it like from the side, and you could also have two kids sitting on either end like a seesaw. So I thought, hey, that's pretty clever, and I did nothing with it. As with so many ideas that we have all the time, it just sat there until late 2016 when I submitted it for the Godrej Design Lab Award, and it got selected. And suddenly I had to do something with it. So I spent the next few months refining the idea, and then it finally took this shape. And through the process of research and refining, I did a lot of research to try and understand if there was any value in this idea of a rocking stool. And I discovered two very, very interesting things. And what I discovered, the number one, the most important thing in my opinion, is that the rocking motion, what it does is in the, physically speaking, for people with autism, rocking motion releases endorphins in the brain. So it helps them to regulate their condition. So if you see autistic children, they're the only ones in the entire class who are constantly moving, right? And that can be a real social handicap, because then you get singled out, and you know how children are, right? We are absolutely ruthless when we are kids. So they will make fun of you and stuff. So now suddenly, if you have 5 of these in a class, you are expected to be rocking when you're on it. So it suddenly becomes a socially inclusive piece of furniture, because there's nothing awkward about you rocking when you're on it. At the same time, it's helping you to regulate your condition. So that was my brilliant eureka moment. But I wasn't happy with that. Let's make this more relevant to more people than just autistic kids, which is great, but more. Then I realized that actually adults can use this too. And you can use this instead of any chair ever built by man, right? And I'll tell you why it's better than any chair ever built. I'm just saying this for effect. I don't really mean that. But see, what happens is most chairs have a backrest. Okay? The minute you rest your back, your back goes into a C curve. You hunch over. And it's horrible. And most of us are guilty of this, right? When you're working on your computers, you're hunching over. And the C curve is terrible. It's really bad because it throws your head out of alignment, and it's the position of the head in front that causes strain to your neck muscles and yada yada yada, and all sorts of cascading effects, and you have all sorts of problems. What this does is because there's no backrest, the number one thing is that your spine enters a neutral S curve. So your alignment is absolutely natural. Secondly, it is actually natural for human beings to want to move a little bit. Okay? So this has a very small degree of motion, and then you can really go all out and time. Okay, I'll just power through the rest. Okay, and you can rock a little bit more. Now the fact that you are moving a little bit all of the time means that you will start to engage your core muscles. It's not going to feel like a workout, but your core will get stronger the more you use this. Okay, so this effectively becomes a piece of furniture that helps you to maintain the correct posture and sit and enjoy your time at the desk while not ending up paralyzed a couple of years down the line. Okay, this is almost done. This is almost my last slide. Now, I want to just sum up by saying, in retrospect, and again, none of this was intentional. It's all on reflection, and hindsight is always 20/20, right? But this is how I kind of see my progression as a designer. Initially, I was working in industries that were defined by the kind of work they were doing, right? So aeronautical, automotive, software platforms. And I moved from that because I felt that was disingenuous. I moved to creating my own design studio, and then obviously all clients gender. Do you design lighting? Do you design exhibitions? So then I became defined by the design deliverables, right? And I found increasingly that, again, design deliverables are not the right way to think about my worth as a designer. So now I really think in terms of problems that I'm solving. And I bring anything that is required to the table to be able to solve that problem. So now it isn't really about defining myself in terms of, yes, I can do craft and branding and retail, but rather thinking in terms of, yes, I can create strategy, and I can work on policy, and I can work in disaster mitigation, and bring all sorts of solutions to the front in being able to do that. So again, in summing up, there's two things I'd like to say. Design is tough as nails, man. It is the hardest thing you will ever undertake to do in your life. If you're lazy or you want an easy life, don't do it. I'm lazy, but I don't care about an easy life. So a bit of a fool that way. But it is tough. And the only way to function and to exist and thrive as a designer is to work in teams, to recognize that value really lies in being able to connect to people around you and solve problems like that. It's not about the lone wolf designer, it's about working together to solve things around us. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope some of you choose to do this then. All the best.